This is the fourth and final talk on this idea of humanism. We have had several where we looked at humanism at a kind of smaller scale. Today we're focusing on how humanism is applied at the scale of larger communities. And we're going to be looking at those 8 characteristics of larger communities that we described in the last talk, and how that can be applied to neighborhoods, districts of cities, and maybe even larger metropolitan areas. The first of the examples we want to look at today is the case of Byker Newtown in Newcastle upon Tyne in England. And this was an extremely ambitious project that was actually begun. They had the idea of it shortly after World War II. In this instance, there was a community that was pretty dismal. Right in the center of Newcastle, it was an 18th century community. It was worker housing. Newcastle is a coal city, kind of a dirty industrial northern British city. And it just had rows and rows and rows and rows of identical little houses for workers. It was public housing, so it was owned by the government. And they were really quite substandard by the time they started looking at this seriously in the mid-20th century. So they had just been little row houses made out of brick with a living room downstairs and generally 2 bedrooms upstairs. And they originally didn't have bathrooms in them. And people would have to go down the street to the bathhouse for a bath, or to an outhouse. It's kind of in an alley. So it was very, very substandard housing. At a certain point, they'd come in and put the bathrooms in, but they put them in on the back side of the house. So it knocked off all the light to the living room and to the bedroom. So it was pretty miserable living conditions there. So because they were owned by the British government, they felt a big responsibility to upgrade these in the middle of the 20th century. And the idea was to just take out this whole neighborhood of 10,000 people's homes and completely redevelop that into a much nicer community. So that seemed like a very enlightened, good thing to do. They looked around for an architect that could do it, and they identified this guy, Ralph Erskine. Ralph Erskine had left England right before World War II because he was a pacifist, and when England entered the war, he did not want to be a part of that, so he went to Sweden. Sweden stayed neutral in World War II, so he wouldn't have to be a soldier there. And then after the war, he just stayed in Sweden. He liked it there, and he started his architectural practice in Sweden. But he committed himself primarily to doing low-income housing for disadvantaged working class, sometimes people. And he did that in Sweden and did it beautifully and built a huge reputation as someone who just could nail it when it came to doing economical housing that really satisfied people of limited means. So that's exactly what Byker was going to be about rehousing a lot of low-income people. And so they go to this expatriate Brit in Sweden and said, would you come down and talk to us about this project? So he did, and he looked at the whole situation in Byker, agreed that it was an egregious situation, needed to be remedied. But in the end of the conversation, he said, I can't take the project. And they said, well, why? I mean, this is exactly what you do. This should be a plum project for you. Why wouldn't you take it? He said, well, if you tear out this whole neighborhood and you send all those people to live in all over different places in the city, and then you build a new neighborhood, some of them are going to stay in their old neighborhood, the interim neighborhood. Some of them are going to come back, but you will have disrupted the whole set of community ties there. This is a neighborhood where intergenerational families live. Grandma and mom and dad and the kids, they all live within a block or two of each other. And this is a place where there are institutions, churches, schools that have been around for a long time. If you move everybody out for 2 or 3 years and rebuild all of this, you will have disrupted all of those community ties. And I can't be a part of that. So they said, well, okay, we understand that. How would you go about doing this? And he said, what I would suggest is you take one little block in Old Biker, maybe the one that has the most vacancies, because a lot of those old houses were boarded up and weren't even occupied anymore. Take a block that is pretty unoccupied and take the few people who still live there and maybe move them into the adjacent block in vacant houses that are there. And then you have an area, a small area, a block that you can tear down. And tear it down, and then when you're building, replacing it, you talk to the people in the adjacent block, find out what they want to have and how they want to live, and you design this block for them, and then you move them from their substandard block adjacent to it into the new houses right there, and then you've made available a block that you can tear down and rebuild there, and you just do that like dominoes over the whole community. Now, you're not going to be through with it in 2 or 3 years. That's going to take 15 years to phase that all the way through the community. But in the end, everybody continues to go to the same church. They send their kids to the same school. Grandma, Aunt Matilda, Uncle Jack still all live within walking distance of each other. And you've maintained all those community ties at the same time as you've renewed the neighborhood. The British authorities said, that's not what we had in mind, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So that is in fact the way they did it. And they did this renewal over about a 15-year period. And it has, I visited there about halfway through that process. The architects had moved their offices into Biker. Ralph Erskine was famous for having his office on a sailboat in Stockholm in the harbor. So that the whole drafting tables, everything were all on a sailboat. And sometimes they would just take off and sail away and come back in the summer. But he kind of closed down the office there and opened this office in Biker. It was in an old funeral parlor that was abandoned, but it was right in the middle of the Biker neighborhood. And they would do their drawings and they would pin them up on the glass that faced the street so the people in the community could see what they were working on moment to moment all the way through the process. So they were very, very engaged with the community. Maybe an example that'll explain that a bit. I was walking around in a super cold December day, and I was walking around the neighborhood, and I went into this building, which is a multi-story building with a skip-stop elevator. You enter down here, and it goes up, and an elevator lets you out here, and you go up or down from that. So I was just trying to get out of the cold, so I bop in this elevator lobby for a minute, and then this little old lady comes in, and she pokes the elevator button, and she's looking over at me like, pretty suspicious dude over here. What are you doing? You don't belong here. And so I realized I was making her nervous, and I went over and said, look, I'm architect from the United States. I'm just looking around here. I got permission. I'm harmless. And she said, oh, you're an architect. Oh, that's good. I've been pressing the button for the elevator here, and it won't come. Could you fix that? And I thought, that's not normally what I think of architects doing. But she had the expectation, because those architects from Erskine's office, they had just made it known to the community, we're here to help you with the physical environment. We moved in here, we're listening to you, we're here to help you make a great physical environment. And if it wasn't working for her, an architect was a perfect person to solve that problem. So, whoa, pressure's on me. I go over and kind of push the button, kick the elevator door, and damn it, the elevator came. And she got on the elevator. And so then I asked, could I come up and see your unit or your area? And she said, oh, sure, yeah, come on. So she took me up to this corridor right here. This is her unit right there. And already you can just start to see a kind of humanism that is unbelievable at now a smaller scale. But each little house, each little unit has a garden, a tiny little planter box that's right there, so she could plant what she wanted there. There's a little place to sit, so she sits out on this stoop sometimes and can watch people coming by there. When she brings her groceries, she can put her groceries right there, fumble for her keys in her purse, open the door, and then take the groceries there. So that's a perfect little bench to help her get her groceries in. She's completely cognizant of how carefully that's designed for her as an elderly woman who, doesn't have the physical capabilities of some other people. But it's just a lovely little expression of her identity in this huge project for 10,000 people. So let's look at some of those 8 characteristics we were talking about. Certainly here you can see that sense of human presence in that little bit of gardening area here. You can see convenience in that little place to put your groceries down. The signs of human presence are all over in this community. They saved many of the historic buildings. This was an old bathhouse, which used to be where they took baths because they didn't have bathrooms in their homes. But it eventually became a kind of social center, and that was a very meaningful building in the community, and they just kept it and incorporated it into what's called the biker wall here. So signs of human presence all over. Incredible attention to convenience. There's a little convenience store like that, pretty much 5-minute walk from anybody, where you can get bread and milk and staples there. Wide range of activities accommodated. There are these wonderful little playgrounds all over in Biker. There's a little area over here where the old guys play chess, little chess table there. So different activities for different kinds of people. Lots of public spaces where those activities are nested in the community. And that also begins to be indicative of the kind of range of people accommodated. There are older people, younger people, families, single people, empty nesters, all kinds of people, and not segregated to certain areas, but really intermixed with each other. This is a wonderful mix here, where on the lower floor there are townhouses where you walk from the outside up a stoop, and there's a little 2-story house right there. Those are like 4 bedrooms, and that's a good place for a family with a bunch of kids. And then up here, there are those skip-stop elevators where you go in and go upstairs, or go in and go downstairs. And there's a wide variety of unit sizes there. These people with 1 kid might live up here, but mostly it's couples or single individuals. But all of these people mix together in the same environment. And another one of those 8 characteristics we talked about was a variety of visual experience, concurrent with some harmony. This whole huge area was designed by one architectural firm, but there is quite a variety between different buildings and different parts of it, and intentionally to give a sense of not a whole lot of public housing all built at the same time by the same person, but having a variety of visual experience in there. Always a human scale, although this is huge number of houses. And these could be just anonymous housing blocks. Instead, you see the scale given by the balconies and given by the windows and the doors. Nice scaling of that facade. Sometimes the buildings are tiny. Sometimes the buildings are much larger. They're integrated with older buildings like that church. Wonderful human scale all the way through the complex. We talked about one of those characteristics was freedom from intrusion or distraction. And again, here it's mostly a pedestrian environment. There's another one of those playground areas over here. So this is an area where there might be lots of kids, a totally pedestrian environment. You could get a fire truck in here if they needed to, or maybe a moving van if somebody's moving in and out. But for the most part, there are no cars in here. It's a very safe area where it's just pedestrian movement and freedom from intrusion or distraction from automobiles. Then there is a huge highway on one side of Biker, and all of the community is turned the other direction. So all of these, those tiny windows are just for bathrooms and kitchens. And that's that building right here, where the other side then is all your living room and bedroom windows. So you're not distracted by the noise or by the pollution of the highway. Always concerned with keeping you aimed in the other direction is south, which gets the better light. In the other direction is the view down to the river. So you're seeing the other side of that building there. And all of the living rooms and dining rooms and bedrooms all look in that more favored direction. And then there's periodic natural relief, although the original biker had no natural relief, hardly a blade of grass. It was just hard, cold, urban environment. But the new biker has lawn areas between the old highway and the biker wall there, which is good for jogging trails and things like that. Many of the houses have little gardens. These little townhouses, each has a garden out in front of it. And even though this is December when I'm there, some people are managing to get roses growing. The Brits love to garden, so there's just periodic, anywhere he can plant a little bit of something, it's there in biker, so it feels softer and greener. So this is an instance where those 8 characteristics really do contribute to a really rich, humane environment at the scale of homes for 10,000 people. Now all of that is complete, and although it's very inexpensive, I want to emphasize this is low-income housing. So this was done on a shoestring, and it's very inexpensive construction, but always with the idea of optimizing the life of the people that live there. The second example here is Tapiola Newtown in Finland. This is for about 35,000 people. In this period, Helsinki, the capital of Finland, was growing. They could have just grown with suburban sprawl, like many other cities in the world were doing, but they decided that they wanted a greater kind of sense of community than suburban sprawl normally gave. So they decided to build a new town outside of Helsinki. Easily you can get into town for cultural events and things like that, but a kind of self-contained community that people could live in and have a sense of identity and community of their own apart from Helsinki. And that's what Tapiola is. It was a beautiful site near an archipelago where the water and the land intersects with lots of islands and peninsulas. So the site was very, very, very beautiful and natural forests and lovely landscape. So they were blessed with that from the beginning. They made it into smaller neighborhoods. So there's a kind of center of the whole community here, but then there's smaller neighborhoods, and each of those circles represents about a 5-minute walk. And within a 5-minute walk, you could get all of the things you needed for convenience of everyday living. So there's this kind of town center, but then there also are these smaller neighborhoods around. On the left here, you can see the town center with common recreational facilities and cultural facilities for the whole town of 35,000. And then this is one of the more inner neighborhoods, a little more dense, but very wide range of people accommodated. There is housing for very disadvantaged people. They have a very great public housing system in Finland. There are some public housing residents in Tapiola. And there also are high-rise buildings with rather luxurious apartments there too. So a very wide range of people accommodated in the neighborhoods. Occasionally then there are neighborhoods also with single-family houses, courtyard houses or townhouses, or detached single-family houses that are very much integrated into nature. So all kinds of different housing options there. And then in each of those little neighborhoods, there would be a community center here, and it would have a post office and a grocery store and a pharmacy and dentist's office, doctor's office on the upper floors here. But a little place where the neighbors could gather, and they would Everything's within a short walking distance of your house. And then also there are recreation areas that are in each of those community districts. And then all the recreation areas are linked together by hike and bike paths so that you can go all through the entire town of Tapiola. And then along the way you can stop and have all kinds of basketball, swimming, different kinds of sports. And on a beautiful day in the summer, oh my God, these people are just mobbed into these outdoor recreation areas because they got a long winter, and when they have warmer weather, they really use the outdoor space. There is this variety of visual experience. There are a lot of different kinds of buildings and houses there. They intentionally used a lot of different architects so that they got a lot of different expressions. But there still is this harmony. They're all modern buildings. They all have a kind of Scandinavian quality to them, and that's pervasive through all of Tapiola. And then there always is this periodic natural relief. They took full advantage of the forest and the greenery and the views of the water. So again, it's a way of making a whole town for 35,000 people that really is convenient, accommodates a lot of different kinds of people, a lot of different kinds of activities. It has periodic natural relief, it has harmony, it has diversity. All of these values that we talked about in the last talk really embodied in a community here. Now, for the last few examples, I want us to look at cities that have made an intervention in their city that embodies these ideals of humanism and the kind of difference that makes in the life of that city and in the way people perceive that city. The first example is actually one from quite a long time ago, San Antonio River Walk, that was produced in the 1920s and 1930s. But many of you, I'm sure, have been to the San Antonio River Walk. It is still an incredibly vibrant, important part of San Antonio. San Antonio's largest industry is tourism, and this is the largest tourist attraction. So it really is a huge economic driver for San Antonio, but it started out as just making a wonderful place for people to be. And if you make that a wonderful place for people to be, then, oh wait, other people from other places want to come there too. And then it became a kind of attraction and an industry of tourism that got built around the San Antonio River Walk. But it's really these same 8 characteristics that inspired that. This was actually an architecture student at UT named H.H. Hugman, who was from San Antonio, returned to his hometown after he graduated. And he had this idea of developing this derelict land by the river bend in San Antonio. And he allied himself with a lot of community groups, largely driven by women who did not want the San Antonio River made into a concrete channel like the Army Corps of Engineers wanted to do, but wanted to see it develop as an asset for the city. And so it's really this young architect and all these community leaders that got together and transformed this in the 20s and 30s into a kind of garden with restaurants and clubs and other things down there. And then it grew in popularity and visitors wanted to be there. But it became popular because of these 8 characteristics. It's got a wonderful range of activities, recreational activities, everyday activities. It's got a wonderful variety of visual experience. There are historic buildings, there are new buildings. They're all kind of woven together in a harmonious way down there. It has a wonderful scale to it, a beautiful kind of gentle, pedestrian, nurturing scale, freedom from intrusion and distraction. The whole city with its cars and buses are a level above, and you're down there where it's quieter and there's water and it's soothing and there are big trees. You know, one huge part is periodic natural relief. They planted tons and tons of vegetation down there. There also are these signs of human presence everywhere, little murals and little artworks and depictions and tile work. Many, and all of this was designed by H.H. Hugman and was then executed in the 1920s and 1930s. And in the end today, it's this beautiful garden environment and a complete kind of exception to the life on the street, which is more urban and hustle bustle, and even there are different parts of the Riverwalk that are different from each other, quieter parts and more active parts. I would say if anything now, maybe the Riverwalk's a little bit of a victim of its own success. It is so popular that now maybe there are more people there than are comfortable, but it has also expanded now to go upstream and downstream of the river, and expanded up to Pearl, which is this kind of second district that's got all the same values and all the same implementation as here. Now, this is an example of humanistic design that made a huge impact on the city of San Antonio. Many other contemporary American cities have made an effort to create these kind of humanistic moments in their city that give them an identity of being a cool place to live, a place where people want to go because there's an option for self-actualization there that there actually isn't in many other cities. So we're going to look at Chicago and New York, but at the end we're going to talk about cities all over the country that have been, in the last couple of decades, really trying to make more humanistic design in the center of their city. This is Millennium Park in Chicago, done in 2005, 15 years ago. They took an old rail yard and they converted it into this huge park. It's got a big performance space for the symphony and an outdoor amphitheater there, many gardens and outdoor spaces there, some major artworks like what they call the Bean and Crown Fountain that we'll look at in some detail. This is that big amphitheater. The stage was designed by Frank Gehry, as you can tell. This is an example, though, of one day when I was there, that they were having a big exercise party on the lawn of the amphitheater there. So there were 200 people doing jazzercise out there. And another day they might be doing yoga. And another day it might be a huge Frisbee contest. And another day it might be a dog show. But they've got all kinds of this variety of activities, lots and lots of different activities accommodated. One of those 8 characteristics that really make Millennium Park a lively, wonderful place to be all year round. And then there are these great signs of human presence, these great artworks. This is what's called The Bean by Anish Kapoor, great British artist, British Indian artist. But a huge attraction, just it's a curious, phenomenal thing to be around and be in and look at all the reflections of it. You can see how it's drawing people to it right there. But my favorite part of Millennium Park by far is Crown Fountain. And this is again an artwork that's in the park. It's 2 pylons like this that have video playing there. In between the pylons is a flooded plaza that just has a couple of inches of water in it. So no kid can drown in this. And so they just have hundreds and hundreds of kids who are out here. And then that attracts a lot of people watching, moms and dads and other people just participating in this kind of scene at Crown Fountain on a hot day in particular. And this is, again, huge range of people accommodated. This is near some pretty low-income neighborhoods, and so these kids don't have swimming pools in their neighborhood, so they just trot down to Crown Fountain, and they spend their day there. And it's a great place for them to hang out, and so they're little kids from those neighborhoods nearby, and they're suburban kids that get brought in by their parents into the heart of Chicago downtown, but a wide range of people that are accommodated there. And then with these big pylons that have these faces, and the faces are faces of everyday Chicago people that are on the pylons. And they have expressions that change over time. So here she's smiling, and then she kind of purses her lips, and then, whoa, out of her mouth comes this spout of water. And there's a fountain that spews out there. And all these kids understand that periodically she's going to spit that water out of her mouth. And so they all line up, and they very orderly go through there and get splashed like hell. And then they go from there, and you can see them start to line up against the wall here. And they line up because they know that after it stops shooting here, it's going to come down from above, and there's going to be a cascade of water that completely drenches them down here. So there's a whole kind of theater of water and kids and movement and that happens there and attracts crowds to watch it and to participate in it and so on. But this is humanism at its best. Range of people accommodated, a lot of different activities, periodic natural relief, variety of visual experience. Millennium Park is gorgeous, and this has been a game changer in Chicago. This is where people, just gravitate, and it's become a real sense of community is created by this great public space in the middle of downtown Chicago. Similar thing has happened around the High Line in New York. This was an abandoned rail line that came through the lower part of Manhattan, and had been abandoned for many years, 30, 40 years, and was just sitting there rusting and falling apart. And there'd been plenty of plans for ripping it out. But a bunch of people got together and said, no, let's make that into a public space. This long, skinny, linear public space that would run through the city and would be a public space, a common space, a humanistic space. So that's what they did. The next few shots are shots I took on a really cold winter day. But even on a cold winter day, man, those New Yorkers are out there enjoying all kinds of different things you can do. On the High Line, you can sit and read. There are amphitheaters, there are little performances, great place for people watching. There's that periodic natural relief even in the wintertime. It's rather beautiful vegetation. They're very careful to make it seasonal, so it's wonderful to look at and to experience all year round. And people go out there because in New York, there's not a lot of outdoor space, especially this part of New York, which is far from Central Park. But there are all these just little places to perch and sit and do different activities. And then sometimes there are orchestrated activities, like little talks or little musical performances that happen along the way too. And then on a beautiful day, oh my God, it's just magic. And it really does get that softness and greenness and periodic natural relief in a part of New York that's very, very hard and urban. Now, this has been multiplied to many other cities around the country. Texas has actually been very good at producing these kinds of public spaces. In Houston, Discovery Green, Buffalo Bayou Park, these are game changers for Houston, real nexus of activity and identity, and really very much appreciated and give a sense of community in Houston. In Dallas, there are a couple of freeway parks that have been built over the freeways and are planned to be built over the freeways in the future. There's this huge Trinity River Park that they're planning right now. In Fort Worth, there's Sundance Square, which is right in the center of the city. All of these have been produced within the last 20 years in Texas and have really transformed, and certainly Austin that way too, the whole Lady Bird Lake, hike and bike trail, all of that. These are humanistic devices. They're ways that cities are saying to the world, we're a good place to live. We're a place where you can have self-actualization. We're a place that respects the dignity and worth of mankind. And we're investing in these humanistic spaces that are assets to people's lives and help build a sense of community there. And that's really the power of architecture, and especially at this larger scale, to have a real impact on people's lives. And through that, often to have an impact on the economy of those cities, making them more desirable places for people to move or businesses to move, and they create a real economic impetus as well. Okay, see you next time.